Hey there, rulers. Welcome back after several many long weeks of Force of Will to the Teacher's Lounge, your favorite ever live Force of Will podcast featuring just me, just Jeremy today. Everyone else is either sick or trying to still recover from the Force of Will Festival or has some other stuff going on. So it's just going to be me, which is great because we have some fun things to talk about today that I think I get to offer some unique perspective on. And then we're going to be kind of breaking down a pretty important topic of the meta today. But before we get into that, it's the usual huge thanks. So first off, huge thanks to all of our sponsors. You can check them out down below. And for what we do on the channel, if you like what we do here on the channel, you can click that join button. It's right down below. It's really easy. You can do it at multiple levels per month. They get you all kinds of perks, and ultimately they help to go to support the channel in terms of buying new equipment, getting to travel, making things like the Force of Will Festival happen. All of that is possible because of you supporting the channel that way. And you get to spam a bunch of cool emotes like Derek is spamming in the chat. The more members we get, the more emotes we can make, and man, do I have a lot of chibi art that I can make into emotes. So if you feel like supporting us and consider it, you can even do it for just $2 a month, and even that goes a long way to help what we do here. The other big thing that I want to mention is that I'm going to be mentioning it from now on the live podcasts is if the Force Bowl Festival was the kickstart, the launch of the Vite Ramen circuit, and we wanted to help people get into that. So there's a link down below to order Vite Ramen kits. So please share that with your local game stores. Please help people to see that and run those events. Each event comes with 8 invites to the new nationals, which will be taking place in August of next year, as well as 7 of the top 8 mats, a champion mat, and the judge mat. And there'll be more kits coming, but this first kit, this is our artwork, if you haven't already seen it. So this is the lovely designed by Neko Mini Punks. It is a lovely playmat, super awesome, very Halloween themed. So definitely consider checking that out. There's a link down below, and you have to use that link. You can't go straight through the Vite Ramen website, so please share that with those people. So yeah, and then of course, as always, there's Odyssey Games and everyone else who supports the channel, and we're really gracious for that. So yeah, Force Will Festival, that was a big thing. To just kind of unpack on it, I'm finally still barely set up and unpacked from it. It's been a week since that happened. It's crazy to think that it's been over a week already. We had 54 players show up, and I hope you guys enjoyed the live stream. You can check out the footage coverage from it. It is currently live on the channel. You can go watch it right now. 54 players from all over the country show up to just have a grand old time for Force of Will, and that event was was really awesome. I have to huge thanks to Destiny Games and Jameson and Josh and Joe and Paul for the hard work that they put in. It was really weird not commentating. So normally I bring in these rigs and I commentate for a few hours, or I commentate every single round and run all the tech stuff. But this time around I was able to just focus on just helping the event go smoothly. We gave over 10 grand of away in terms of cash and prizes, including everybody at the event getting a time spinning witch. That was a little bit of a secret that I had saved for everyone. And yeah, it was awesome to see. And it's definitely, I guess I can announce now that we're definitely going to be doing a Force of Will Festival again in the future. This has shown that this is something that people wanted to have experience, and so we're definitely going to work to make sure that we get it to happen again. So be on the lookout in like maybe 6 months for details of when that's happening. So yeah, we'll be figuring that out, but we're definitely going to be hosting more of those in the future. I think ultimately to kind of go at it from sharing my experience through my time at Forza Will, I have built up enough connections all over the place that they were all willing to chip in, and so huge thanks to all of them for making that happen. In terms of the pricing, I couldn't have asked any other way. But I think the thing that I want to share with everybody else is if you're wanting to host something like this, if you're wanting to give that a try, just try. I will speak to some of the financials because I think that's important. We as a group decided to commit to $500. First off, we were not trying to make money off of this event. We committed to a upfront promise of $500 cash to top 8 with a certain guarantee after a certain number. So we, the 4 of us who were organizing it, put up on reserve essentially $500 in cash. That being said, we ended up paying $0 out of pocket for the 1 grand that we gave out to top 8. Speaking of, if you can put in that promise, you have to recognize that if you're not trying to make money off of it, which if you're a store, clearly you're trying to make money off of it. We're at a unique position being players in the community. But if you're just trying to build and host something and you don't really care about the money, because everyone who was there was volunteering, we used entries to cover that money. And so our total expense in terms of all the pricing and everything else that we purchased was $350 for over 10 grand worth of stuff. And then we were able to use the entries to cover. Excuse me, very tired. We were able to use the entries to cover the 1 grand as well as make back the $350 we initially invested. So a grand total of $0 in the hole. And we ran an event that brought people in from all over the country. So the main reason I say that is anybody can do this. You don't have to have a lot of cash flow. You don't have to be a store. The whole beauty of Force of Will is connecting you with the world, and I'm sure many of you are connected to different players, to different stores, to different avenues, that you have the possibility of being able to put these things together. And the beauty is with the pricing, these kits are a great way to try your first one off. It's $150 for a kit, and Vite Ramen has the commitment that if you run an event, report it, and you didn't at least break even, Vite Ramen will refund you the difference. Pay 150 people, or pay $150, charge $20 an entry, 6 people show up, Vite Ramen will pay you $30 back. So there is zero risk to hunting these, so I definitely recommend that everyone try. And let's make it happen. Because the more it happens, the more these events fire, the more events will fire in the future, and the better this circuit builds too. And I also think it'll just be good to build a community of players who also know how to run tournaments and organize tournaments and convince stores that, hey, look, we can do this. You can commit to this. You can join and partner with us. I think that's a way that we start kind of grassroots building our community back in a big way to directly support the GP season, which we'll hopefully learn more about up at Worlds. Next event for me is Worlds, so we'll be moving towards that, but that'll be an interesting experience. So we're probably going to do just a shorter, feel free in the chat as I kind of move along to ask any questions that you might have. We're probably going to do a shorter lounge tonight because it's just me and my perspective is just my own. But if you have a bunch of questions, then we can go and talk about those. But the one thing that the FoW Festival showed me in terms of the meta is that we not just have our main hand, we not just have our second hand from the rune deck right now, we have 3 hands. And the third hand is 100% the graveyard. More so than I think ever before. The grave has been a resource before. I harken back to the Fox meta. I harken back to the Remnant meta, where we had tons of different Remnant cards that were very impactful. Or Reanimate meta that we used to have with things like Dance of Shadows and things of that nature. But it is becoming more and more obvious to me, especially after the results of the festival, that this meta is about managing your 3 hands. Cards that we saw having a ton of impact, Atom decks, Dark Alice, particularly Athenia being a big card, Shayla's Foresight being a big card, Command of Life and Death, Invitation to Purgatory. Like, everything was trying to use the grave in some kind of aspect, and I think I think that's an important thing that people need to recognize and kind of go into. We're going to talk about how that changes your mentality a little bit in terms of deck building, in terms of play lines, in terms of all of that. Gray Grumbler, how many people working are really needed to fire off an event? Ultimately, you need someone to run tournament software and build pairings, and you need a judge. You need 2 people, really, based on the number of attendance, right? The bigger the attendance is, the more you have to worry about it. That being said, if it's a small tournament, 8 to 16 people, sometimes the judge can be the TO. So really you only need 1 person, right? Because then you can have that person work the tournament software, the pairings aren't super long, and that they can do all the announcements and everything else. So it really does range into what your attendance is. We had a grand total of myself, we had Ben, who worked our computer, Jameson, who helped with check-in and then doing some side stuff, Paul and Joe for commentary, Josh and me. So we grand total had a total of 6 people running our event for 54 people. Ultimately, though, Jameson, after the first couple rounds, wasn't necessarily as needed. So really, it ran smoothly off of 5. But that was like running super smooth, optimum, large crowd, everything else. If you get down to smaller crowds, sometimes people can double up. If you don't have a stream, that obviously eliminates a lot of the work too. So there's a lot of different elements that go into that. How would you go about getting a judge? That can be a tricky part. So one of the biggest things is to potentially have a judge on call. There are not, because of the way the changes in the company's structure, that changed from Forcible Code to iSpy, the judge program, at least in the U.S., has been frozen temporarily. We don't know when that's going to come back. We don't know what it is. So it's going to be about kind of knowing knowledgeable people in the format and in the rulings and kind of just asking questions and building your own knowledge base. You can run an event without an official judge. It can be done. Ultimately, though, it's usually recommended that you have someone who is very knowledgeable in the rules and hopefully has connections to someone who is a judge, such as myself or the other, the Worldwide Judge Group, or Stephanie Shaw, or anybody else, or Josh Patton from Rogues Guild. You contact if you have a question in the moment that you can message really quickly. Philip Mosca is one as well. But if the people who are attending the event trust the person who is the judge, then technically they don't have to be a judge, especially if you're just running a fan event, because most of these are not officially sanctioned. They're just a community event. So that's just something that you have to kind of keep in mind. And that kind of plays into it. So that would be the easiest way to go into that. Of course, if you have any other questions, these are great. Feel free to ask any other questions that you have about tournament organization or what I experienced or anything else. I'd be happy to explain those things. So, grave management. This is really important. I'm going to current cards that deal with the graveyard that are super important in this meta. Dark Alice, Perfect Loki, Harvesting Season, Athenia, Command of Life and Death. Not really anything red. Not really, and the 3-drop Alice, not really Kaguya. So those are like the big ones right now. Perfect Loki and all of those shenanigans. Let's see. Sacrificial Altar, in a sense. Layla, in a sense. Stan, in a sense. Fallen Angel of Demonic Fiery Vengeance. There's a lot of cards right now that have a lot of impact, whether they're in hand, on board, or in grave. And March of the Dead, yes, that's also a really big one. That you have to be mindful of both in your deck building and in your playlines. So the one thing, too, is if you're playing a deck that doesn't revolve around the graveyard at all, or doesn't have any graveyard interaction, the unfortunate thing is you're probably going to be in a bad spot. We don't need graveyard hate, Steven says. Steven, you won the festival with a deck that abuses the graveyard, so I think that's not entirely true. So the thing to recognize, I think, is that you have to be mindful of what actually can touch the graveyard and why you're playing those cards. So let's talk, for instance, about a tech card that we saw brought out at the festival, which was Shayla's Foresight. So Shayla's Foresight is a prime example of a nice little tech card where it shuffles all the cards back from a player's graveyard into their deck. It doesn't target at all, and it doesn't banish. This card was very important and a good tech card because a big card to protect the graveyard right now is Dark Alice. That's a big piece that people want to protect. And it's kind of hard to kill her with 5 defense. There's not a lot of spot removal necessarily right now for Dark Alice. So if you can't target it, if you can't remove it, but your opponent is manipulating it, you need to be able to answer it, and that comes from the sake of Shayla's Foresight. So that was a great tech card, an example of a solid tech card to deal with the graveyard. And there are some decks, and I think Derek is attesting in the chat right now that he wasn't expecting it. He got hit for it, and it was an absolute blowout card. And so that's something that you need to be mindful of. If you're a deck that's using the graveyard, you have to be mindful of it. And I think that there's Burial Rites in red. That's correct. Burial Rites is also a card that hits it. So I think the thing to be mindful of, so let's talk about if you're playing to hurt the graveyard. You have to play and remember, okay, look, what deck it used to be the idea of I'm playing my cards on the turn. What is the worst possible thing that can happen with what's on my opponent's field and what's in my opponent's hand? And is it worth taking the risk? Right now, the answer is what is the worst thing that can happen between my opponent's field, my opponent's hand, and what my opponent can put into and take out of the grave? There have been matches where I have also lost because I completely forgot about the idea of my opponent was potentially going to be able to try to put something in the grave to then immediately bring it back. Invitation to Purgatory is a prime example of this card. If you don't respect it, it produces 2 will, right? So the main thought in terms of utilization of Invitation is to kind of go, cool, will you bury a card, you remove Satan from your deck, turn that online, you got 1 will left over to do something else. But we have Command of Life and Death, right? So Burial Rites is essentially pay 2 will, get any 3-drop from your deck, and put it on the field, provided you have a Command of Life and Death in your hand, which makes use of the Athenian 3-drop. I wasn't expecting that when I played some games. Totally blanked on it. Didn't really think about that idea. And I watched Steven I think I watched, no, I didn't watch Steven. I watched Paul Ludwig in his top 4 match. No, is it top 4? Yes, it was his top 4. All 3 games on turn 2, he goes, because his opponent tapped out or just didn't have anything to respond to it, just go Invitation, bin the Athenia, play Command of Life and Death, bring back Athenia, recover 2 stones. So there's that there, right? And so you have to kind of consider that it really is a second hand, that there are certain cards that are going to take things from deck to grave and then bring them from grave to field. And you have to be able to answer those. You have to be considerate of those, which is why I think certain cards are being looked at in a different way. A card that was used for this a while ago stopped being used for it for that reason. It was just kind of a pseudo bonus effect, but is now coming back into play because of that effect is Viola, the 2-drop Viola from the structure deck. So it used to be used as a really solid quick cast body that gave flying to potentially push through for lethal, as well as could trade up into heavy aggro decks, right? And it was just kind of like, well, it conveniently can also remove things from the graveyard. Viola right now, the main perk of that card is the fact that it can remove things from your opponent's graveyard, provided they can't target. So you have to kind of be more mindful of that in your deck building. If you're playing a green deck, you probably need to find room for Viola. If you're playing a blue deck, you definitely need to find room for Shayla's Foresight. You have to be respectful of that graveyard hate in some way, because it's the same way that, think of it this way, non-Divinity Ruler decks struggle sometimes because they don't have a Divinity deck. So a Divinity deck technically has 2 hands to open, right? So if your opponent is starting with 2 hands and you're starting with 1, that's a natural advantage, right? So if you're a deck that is, so if we both have 2 hands, but you are using the graveyard and I don't have any graveyard hate, then you have 3 hands and I have 2, which again puts you at that natural advantage. So when you're doing your deck building, I think that there has to be some consideration, regardless of color, for the matchups that are going to try to make use of that 3rd hand. The downside to this, though, is that there are some decks that truly don't. If you're playing a deck that is making use of the graveyard, then your consideration becomes, what extra cards am I playing to protect my graveyard or refill my graveyard? This is really important. For instance, I saw, and you'll see it this week on the feature match. I'm playing a Chimimi deck that was piloted by Dustin Jones to 9th place at the event, and he was playing we're playing the Athenia, right? So I was playing against an Adam deck, and so I moved the way that I needed to turn off his Alice on my turn, though, not being considerate of, again, how is he drawing cards into that 3rd hand? So what did he do? He's already used his Harvesting Season. He's already used his Invitation, Freed from the Altar. He'd already used his Power of Immortality at this point. So what does he do on his turn to turn on the Alice that I wasn't able to kill? Invitation to Purgatory. Just casts it and just mills Adam straight to the graveyard. I was tapped out. I wasn't respectful of that. But that was good deck building on his part because it had this idea of I'm not just going to go all in once and not be able to reestablish. The old Adam Harvest deck had that old problem where if it went off but then got punished, it didn't have a way to rebuild that momentum. Um, a lot of cards became dead, a lot of cards became everything else, and so that deck had to shift to pull some pieces out of the rune deck, pull some pieces out of the main deck, to then be able to try to recover from the punish. It is a very big game of checks and balances that I think people just need to be more cognizant of. It's not just, oh, I have graveyard hate. It's, okay, what kind of graveyard hate do I have? When do I play that graveyard hate? What's the proper timing? How can my opponent respond to the graveyard hate? Dark Alice is a primary example, especially with Altar, of recognizing when to try to use your graveyard hate. Because if you're doing it, if your opponent has all Black Will, but they have an Altar up, and you're like, oh, this is safe, I'll try to remove their graveyard, then you just go, oh, well, in response to you trying to remove my graveyard, I'll crack my Altar to go grab a Dark Alice. You were thinking about the stones, but you weren't thinking about what was on the field. They are all interconnected, and we're at 3D chess now. So I just think that's really important for people to kind of be cognizant of and take into consideration in testing. You have to be considerate of all of those things. We've talked before on the Teacher's Lounge about being able to pick out very quickly what the other cards in your opponent's deck are based on just your first couple turns. And this is definitely a meta where you have to, being able to do those predictions based on not only what's in the rune deck, but also what might be in the deck is very, very vital. So that's something you also just need to protect yourself against, and why running running gauntlets, looking at deck lists, studying the meta at this point in time, although we've only had the one event, at least in terms of New Frontiers, is very, very, very relevant. And so I definitely just recommend you do a lot of testing and a lot of research, because that's going to be the way that you get the best sense of what the tempos of games are and how you use to your advantage or shift it. Envoy Adam is also a partial answer to Eternal Resonators. If he can survive, yeah, for sure. 3-drops are a little tricky right now. You'll notice that a lot of 3-drops aren't getting cast, and especially unless it's Athenia. Asthma is usually like a 1 or 2 of now instead of being a straight 4 of, as it uses kind of a last-ditch finisher. It's just some things that you have to consider. But yeah, you can trick it. Doing any Wanderer graveyard builds with the crazy new stuff. You need like Dark Alice with Necronomicon. So Dark Alice with Necronomicon won't work. They'll still get removed from game, because the way it works is with Necronomicon, the card goes from the graveyard to the chase, and then back towards the graveyard, which would then remove it from the game. It never actually hits the graveyard. This is the same reason why back when you played Abdul, you would have Abdul out on the field, cast a card from graveyard in response, use Abdul to negate the effect of Necronomicon for the turn, so then the card would go back to the graveyard. So you can't quite do it the way the way that you think there. I have an Adam list, but I need like 15 super rare from Decisive Battle. If you're looking for I'm going to do this right now because that's a good question. So there's a link to Odyssey Games in the description. I'm going to go check what Odyssey Games currently has live. Games on their site. You can just search. There's a link down below to their site. But looking at Force Will, Decisive Battle of Valhalla, let's talk about what they have in stock. Lucifers, Sephiroths, Shivas, Deus Ex Machina, Bastards, Berserker Shimimis, Fenrir's, Brunhildes, Kenshis, Liches. Let's see. Oof. So it looks like they're out of... Oh, sadly, it looks like they're out of Kaguyas, Nyarlathoteps, potentially. Oh, no, they've got Odin still. That is a little sad. So they're out of stands. In terms of full arts, they have super rare. Sorry, in terms of super rares, looks like they have Deus Ex, Bastet, Berserker Trimimi, Shiva, Fenrir, Brunhild, Genshi Tenshon, Deus Ex Machina, Sephiroth, and Lucifers. So no Perfect Lokis, no Nyarlathoteps, no Isises, no Dark Alices, and no Kaguyas. That's fair. That's a lot of those are very, very good. Sadly, no Kaguyas available. Kame can be used for some 1 or 2 drop removal. That's an interesting tech. 4 drop is a little bit much, but sometimes the aggro deck can get there. Especially if you consider maybe using it against Genshi Tenshon deck. That would be... that's an interesting decision. There you could use, if you get Genshi Tenshon out and keep him on the field, then you could cheat out Kame using the Master Rune, steal a dude, and then just swing through. Each time someone swings with Kame on the board, it'd be 6 damage to your opponent's face before any damage connects. Oh, it's an interesting idea, William. Thank you. IU is IU is nice. Yes, IU the 2-drop to steal a 1-drop. There are options, right? But I think testing nowadays, in this meta especially, has to be cognizant of that third hand, has to be cognizant of in deck building, in techs against, in play lines. Like, there are going to be play lines that you hold up will purely for graveyard hate, just to respect it, which I think is something that... And sorry, you're going to hold up graveyard hate to respect it on a very wide swath of the meta. It used to be that there were very few decks, like, you were like, oh, this specific matchup, I'm going to sideboard into my graveyard hate so that I can punish it, right? I think back to Gil meta, right? It was like, oh, playing against Gil, having some form of graveyard hate against Gil is important, but the rest of the field, I don't really need to worry about it. This is a meta where pretty much every deck is using the graveyard at some point in terms of the top tables, which is something we haven't seen before. So you're definitely going to see some stuttered tempo in terms of not pushing as much as maybe you could, because you need to respect and protect the graveyard and respect their graveyard and protect your graveyard. And that is something we just haven't seen on this wide path meta in a very, very long time, if ever, in Force of Will's history. So just something to keep in mind as a whole. Pay your respects and make sure you protect. He attack, but mostly he's an asthma. You're welcome, Derek. Having Lord of Vermilion on board and playing the Neo Berserk Dragon is hilarious. That's interesting. Make everything super giant. And that's the thing right now that I think is also very important to recognize. We talked about this before on the lounge. I know Derek has been part of this conversation. Is if you don't care about competitive, though, which our hope is that if you're coming to the Teachers Lounge, you're wanting to talk competitive and grow a little bit. But if you're not, if you're just here to hang out, awesome, cool. Glad to have you too. Is that there is a ton of fun that you can build in this meta regardless of maybe you just don't have to care about the graveyard. You know, if nobody in your locals is really playing that stuff, you could just have a lot of fun. For instance, a deck that we're bringing onto the channel in a few weeks, I have to build it and kind of do some tweaks to it, we like to call it Burnhild. And the goal of that deck is to use Nyarlathotep to burn you to death, not by damage, but just actually burn you, the player, to death. And so you'll see what I'm talking about. That deck is goofy as hell. It's a ton of fun. It doesn't respect the graveyard at all. But like, it's good. It's fun. And that's the cool thing I think is going on right now in Force Will, is that there's just so much fun that you can do outside of the competitive decks. But just if you're playing competitive, you have to respect the third hand. Otherwise, you're just going to get blown out a lot, and you're going to find yourself struggling quite a bit. Travis, with me, a problem I have is to play too quickly with my plays. Now you have to slow your plays. Yes. Yep, absolutely. It's the idea of this is a format where + 1s are all you really want to push for. There used to be formats where you had blowout plays, where like if you got it, you got it. You push it, and you could get like +2s, +3s, maybe even the spare +4. And that's what you were trying to kind of go for, like these hard punishes. This is a game where every +1 you get in terms of tempo is a big step towards winning the game. And so seeing it as being that incremental building block to victory, 99 steps to success kind of strategy can really help in your matches too. You don't want to go too fast, because if you get too fast, it's very easy to overextend yourself, even when it doesn't look like you're overextending yourself. So you just really got to practice that if you're playing at the competitive level. So that's just something to keep in mind. Let's see. It's been about a half an hour, so I'm gonna just see if anybody else has any questions at this point. Talking to myself with a camera and the chat is always fun, but because it's just me, I think we're gonna have a easier night tonight. We'll be back next week with someone we haven't had on the lounge in quite some time, and I'm very excited. So stay tuned for that next week. And then, of course, we're leading up to Worlds, so we will be figuring all of that stuff out soon as well. So I'll just give it to the chat for another minute or two if you guys have any other questions or anything else you want to talk about, or whether it be about the meta, talking about the third hand, or whether it be the idea of tournament organization or anything else like that. Again, please go check out those White Ramen kits down below. Share that link with your owner and let them know about the refund policy that has been publicly stated by White Ramen, that they will refund it if you don't fill it back. That'll be great. And then to close it out again, it feels weird to say, but if you like what we did here, if you like the content we have on the channel, please consider subscribing is always great, and appreciate that, and click the bell. Let's be a YouTuber. Ring that bell. But also consider joining the channel and becoming a Ruler School alumni, because that's the easiest way to directly support what we do here, and help us to bring things into higher and higher quality and better stuff. So you have a large community room. So yeah, that's going to be it for tonight. Excuse me. But again, thank you guys so much for being here and for watching. And until next time, I'll say class dismissed. See you next time, everybody.